The insomnia of a god start with a sound, not an explosion, not a thunderclap, but a hum. Imagine a low, constant hum, the sound of millions of voices talking, the cry of infants, the grinding of millstones, the hammering of copper, the barking of dogs, the shouting of merchants. Imagine that sound never stopping. It seeps through the walls. It vibrates in the floorboards. It fills the air like a thick, heavy fog. Day after day, year after year, century after century. Now, imagine you are a god. You are Enlil, the king of the universe, the lord of the command. You live in a palace of clouds and light. You are accustomed to the perfect crystalline silence of the cosmos. But down below, on the surface of the earth, there is this noise, and it is getting louder. It is getting so loud that you cannot think. It is getting so loud that you cannot rest. It is getting so loud that for 600 years you have not slept. This is not a modern metaphor for urban stress. This is the literal motivation for the apocalypse in the oldest stories of mankind. We are often taught that the Great Flood was a moral judgment, that humans were wicked, sinful, and corrupt, and that God or the gods washed the world clean to punish evil. That is the biblical version, the moral version. But the Sumerian version, the original version, is colder. It is more frightening. In the Epic of Atrahasis, written on clay tablets nearly 4,000 years ago, Enlil doesn't care about our sins. He doesn't care if we are good or bad. He cares about the volume. The text is explicit. The country became too wide, the people too numerous. The god got disturbed with their uproar. Enlil stands before the divine council, eyes red with exhaustion, and says, "The noise of mankind has become too intense for me. By their uproar, I am deprived of sleep." Sleep. Think about the vulnerability of that statement. A god who can summon hurricanes, a god who can shake mountains, is being tortured by insomnia. He is being defeated by the sound of life itself. Why is a god so fragile? Is Enlil just an irritable old landlord? Or does noise, the Sumerian word Rigmu, mean something more dangerous? In the ancient world, noise wasn't just sound waves. It was a symbol of chaos. It was the sound of a population that had grown too large for its container. It was the sound of a city that was becoming stronger than the temple. To Enlil, that hum rising from the earth wasn't just annoying. It was a threat. It was the sound of humanity outgrowing its purpose. We were created to be silent servants, to dig the ditches and grow the grain and stay quiet in the background. But we didn't stay quiet. We multiplied. We built. We argued. We lived. And that life was loud. This video is the story of that noise. It is the story of why the gods tried to silence us, and why even when the waters rose to cover the mountains, the noise refused to die. The multiplication error. To understand the insomnia of Enlil, we have to look at the mathematics of creation. When the Anunnaki created humanity, they made a critical engineering error. They wanted a workforce, but they didn't want to manufacture every single worker by hand. That would be too much effort for the gods. So Enki, the clever god, the genetic engineer, gave us a feature that the gods didn't fully think through. He gave us the ability to reproduce. He made us biological machines that could copy themselves. This seemed like a brilliant efficiency hack at the time. The workforce would replenish itself. The gods could relax. But biology follows the law of exponential growth. One couple becomes 4 people. 4 becomes 16. 16 becomes 64. Over 200 years, the time frame mentioned in the texts, the population didn't just grow, it exploded. The Atrahasis text describes the earth as bellowing like a bull. The land was literally groaning under the weight of human habitation. Enlil looked down from his high throne in the Ikor temple, and he didn't see a neat, orderly garden anymore. He saw a swarm. He saw cities spreading like a fungus across the plains. He saw rivers being diverted, forests being cut down. He saw the chaotic, uncontrollable energy of a species that had no natural predators. And he realized he had lost control. He tried to fix it. He tried to implement what we might call population control measures. But he didn't call them that. He called them plagues. The first attempt to silence the noise was biological warfare. Enlil ordered Shurupu, a plague, a fever, a sickness, to descend on the cities. Let there be a plague. Let silence return. He wanted to cull the herd, to thin the numbers back down to a manageable level. And it started to work. The noise quieted. The cities filled with the sick. But humanity had a secret weapon. We had an ally on the inside, Enki. Enki, who had designed us, didn't want to see his experiment fail. He whispered a secret to the wise man, Atrahasis. He didn't tell him to invent a medicine. He told him to manipulate the politics of heaven. Enki said, "Don't pray to the high gods. They are the ones killing you. Instead, bake bread, brew beer, and offer it all to Namtar, the god of the plague. Bribe the executioner. Overwhelm the god of sickness with gifts so that he becomes ashamed to do his job, that he may be shamed by the gift and wipe away his hand." It worked. Namtar accepted the bribe. The plague lifted, and humanity bounced back. We healed. We had more children, and the noise returned louder than before. Enlil tried again. He sent a drought. He told Adad, the rain god, to withhold the waters. Let the vegetation not grow. Let the dark fields become white with salt. He tried to starve the noise into silence. But again, Enki whispered the strategy. Bribe Adad. Feed the rain god. And the mist returned. The wheat grew, and the noise returned. Enlil was trapped in a cycle of escalation. Every time he tried to suppress humanity, we found a way to survive. We were resilient. We were clever. We were desperate. And to a god of absolute order, this resilience was terrifying. It proved that we were no longer just tools. We were becoming rivals. And so Enlil made a decision. No more targeted strikes. No more plagues. No more droughts. The system was too corrupted. The noise was too deep. He needed a total reset. He needed to wash the slate clean. He proposed the flood. The nature of Rigmu. Before we get to the water, we need to pause on this word Rigmu. Why was Enlil so obsessed with it? Is it really just acoustic volume? Think about what noise represents in a hierarchical society. In a prison, silence is mandatory. In a library, silence is mandatory. In a court, silence is mandatory. Silence is the sound of obedience. Silence means everyone is in their place doing what they are told, not drawing attention to themselves. Noise is the opposite. Noise is the sound of freedom. Noise is the sound of a market where people are trading without permission. Noise is the sound of a tavern where people are complaining about the king. Noise is the sound of lovers, of fighters, of innovators. When Enlil complained about the Rigmu, he wasn't just complaining about a headache. He was complaining about life. He was realizing that life, by definition, is messy. It is chaotic. It spills over boundaries. You cannot have a living workforce that is also perfectly silent. You cannot have biology without the mess of biology. Enlil wanted a paradox. He wanted the benefits of humanity, the labor, the food, the temples without the cost of humanity, the noise, the growth, the unpredictability. He wanted a machine. But he got a species. And this is the tragedy of the Anunnaki in the Sumerian story. They wanted to be masters of a world that obeyed them perfectly. But they created a world that was alive. And you cannot control life perfectly without killing it. This is why the flood was the only logical conclusion for Enlil. He didn't want to manage us anymore. He wanted to turn the machine off. He wanted to return the earth to the primordial silence of the water. He wanted to sleep. But sleep would come at a terrible price. Because Enlil forgot one crucial thing. He forgot who was making his dinner. The conspiracy of silence. The decision to launch the flood was not unanimous. It was a conspiracy. Enlil forced the other gods to swear an oath of secrecy. Let no god speak to the humans. Let the destruction be a surprise. He knew that if Enki warned us, we would find a way to survive again. He wanted total surprise, total annihilation. But Enki is the god of loopholes. He had sworn an oath not to speak to any human. So he didn't. He spoke to a wall. He went to the reed hut where Atrahasis lived, and he whispered to the wall of the hut, knowing Atrahasis was sleeping on the other side. Wall, listen to me. Reed hut, pay attention. Tear down your house. Build a boat. Abandon possessions and save life. This is a famous scene. But look at what Enki tells him to bring on the boat. Take on board the seed of all living things, but also your family, your relatives, and the craftsmen. The craftsmen. The skilled workers. Why them? Because Enki wasn't just saving biological life. He was saving civilization. He was saving the noise. The banging of the carpenter's hammer. The weaving of the loom, the skills that made humanity loud and productive. Enki was preserving the very thing Enlil wanted to destroy. He was building an ark of noise. The flood came. The texts describe it not as a rainstorm, but as a war. The dams of the deep were broken. The Anunnaki turned the sky black. Adad roared in the clouds. Ninurta broke the dikes. The world was smashed like a clay pot. And then, silence. The silence Enlil had wanted for 600 years finally arrived. The cities were gone. The markets were gone. The crying babies were gone. The earth was flat water. The Rigmu was dead. Enlil finally had his peace and quiet. He could finally sleep. But he couldn't eat. While the world was drowning, a tiny speck of wood floated on the surface of the abyss. The Ark. Inside that box was everything that Enlil hated. It was a capsule of pure chaos. Animals screeching, humans praying. The smell of life cramped into a small space. It was the concentrated essence of the Rigmu. For 7 days and 7 nights, the storm raged. The Sumerian text says, "The wind blew the deluge, the tempest leveled the land." But inside the ark, the noise continued. It was the heartbeat of the world kept alive in a wooden chest. And outside the gods were witnessing the consequences of their silence. The Epic of Gilgamesh gives us a devastating image of the Anunnaki during the storm. They weren't celebrating their victory. They weren't enjoying the peace. They were terrified. The text says, "The gods were frightened by the deluge, and shrinking back, they ascended to the heaven of Anu." The gods cowered like dogs crouched against the outer wall. Ishtar, the queen of heaven, cried out like a woman in labor. "The old days are turned to clay because I commanded evil in the assembly of the gods. How could I command war to destroy my people?" Why was she crying? Was it empathy? Partly, but it was also realization. She looked down at the silent water, and she realized what silence actually meant. Silence meant emptiness. Silence meant no worship. Silence meant no offerings. Silence meant that the vibrant, chaotic, noisy world that she ruled over was gone. A queen without subjects is not a queen. She is just a lonely spirit in the sky. Enlil had promised them peace, but he had given them a graveyard, the silence of death. When the storm finally broke, Epic of Atrahasis opened the window of his ark. The description he gives is one of the most haunting lines in ancient literature. "I looked at the weather. Silence reigned, and all of mankind had returned to clay. Silence reigned. Enlil's wish had come true. The insomnia was cured. The uproar was gone. The landscape was as flat as a roof. No cities, no temples, no smoke rising from the altars." But there was another consequence of this silence: hunger. For 7 days the gods had not eaten. In the Mesopotamian worldview, the gods did not cook for themselves. They relied on the daily sacrifices of humans. The smoke of burning meat was their food. The libations of wine were their drink. Without humans, the supply chain was broken. The Anunnaki were starving. Enlil had achieved absolute order. But absolute order is sterile. It produces nothing. You cannot eat silence. And so, when Utnapishtim landed his ark on Mount Namush, he did something strategic. He didn't build a house first. He didn't plant a field. He built an altar. He gathered wood, cane, cedar, and myrtle. He slaughtered a sheep. He poured out a libation. He lit a fire. And a thin column of smoke rose up from the mountain, piercing the empty sky. It was the first signal of life in a dead world. It was a signal that the kitchen was open again, the return of the fly. What happened next is the moment the power dynamic flipped forever. The gods smelled the smoke. The text says the gods smelled the savor. The gods smelled the sweet savor. And then the line that destroys the dignity of the gods. The gods gathered like flies over the sacrificer. Like flies. Imagine that image. The great Enlil, the mighty Anu, the beautiful Ishtar, buzzing around a burning sheep carcass like starving insects. They were desperate. They were famished. They crowded around Utnapishtim, pushing and shoving to get a whiff of the smoke. In that moment, the hierarchy collapsed. They weren't the masters anymore. They were the dependents. They realized that they needed the noise. They needed the messy, loud, chaotic humans to feed them. Enlil arrived last. When he saw the ark, he was furious. Has any of these mortals escaped? No man was to survive the destruction. He wanted to kill Utnapishtim. He wanted to finish the job, but the other gods stopped him, not because they loved humans, but because they were hungry. Ninurta spoke up. How could you bring on this flood without counsel? The sinner should bear his sin, but do not cut off the thread of life. Effectively, they told Enlil, you can punish them, but you cannot erase them. We need them. Enki, the architect of survival, stepped forward to broker a deal. He offered Enlil a compromise, a way to keep the humans but manage the noise. The compromise. Enlil agreed to let humanity live, but the terms of existence had to change. The original design, the immortal, rapidly breeding Lulu, was too dangerous. So Enki rewrote the biological code. He introduced mortality. Before the flood, the texts imply humans lived for vast spans of time, like the kings who ruled for 20,000 years. After the flood, lifespans were cut short. Death became a mandatory part of the system. He introduced fragility. Let there be a third category among the people, Enki said. Let there be women who bear and women who do not bear. Infertility, miscarriage, infant mortality. Demons like Pashitu were created to snatch babies from the womb. Celibate priestesses were established to reduce the breeding pool. This was the dark compromise. To save the species, individual suffering was introduced. To save the noise of life, the volume had to be regulated. Enlil got his population control. But humanity got to live. The ark opened. The animals walked out. The craftsmen walked out. And the noise began again. Quieter at first. More controlled. But still there. The hum of civilization returned. The cities were rebuilt. The temples rose again. But the relationship was never the same. The gods retreated to the sky. They stopped walking among us. Perhaps they were ashamed of their moment of weakness. Perhaps they realized that they could no longer look us in the eye after we saw them gathering like flies. They became distant. They became myths. And we became the masters of the earth. Conclusion. The modern echo. So why does this story matter today? Why should we care about the insomnia of a Sumerian god? Because we are becoming Enlil. Look at us. We have become the gods of this planet. We have mastered the rivers. We have leveled the mountains. We have created our own Lulu machines, AI synthetic biology. And just like Enlil, we are becoming obsessed with noise. We complain about overpopulation. We complain about the chaos of the natural world. We complain about the unpredictability of the systems we created. We build algorithms to filter the noise. We build walls to keep out the chaotic masses. We dream of a clean, orderly world, a silent world. But the story of Atrahasis is a warning. It warns us that the desire for total control is a death wish. It warns us that you cannot have life without the mess of life. You cannot have a civilization without the Rigmu. If we try to silence the world, if we try to sterilize nature, or control every variable, or eliminate everything that annoys us, we might succeed. We might achieve the perfect silence that Enlil wanted. But we will find ourselves in the end starving in a dead world. The noise is not the enemy. The noise is the sound of survival. It is the sound of resilience. It is the sound of us refusing to be quiet, refusing to be erased, refusing to let the gods sleep until they acknowledge our right to exist. The Anunnaki are gone. But the noise The noise is louder than ever,